Hey, Sighted Crusaders, I have a concern as a parent and a question for you. I need your advice. I don't want to give Jack, my 15-month-old, and I got a baby girl in a couple weeks coming, I don't want to give them too comfortable of a life. It's so odd. We work so hard to provide for our family, but maybe I'm making life too comfortable, too easy for them. No kid has ever lived with as much material prosperity as we have today. No one ever. That sandwich your kid ate this afternoon, the bread, the meats, the cheeses, the pickle, the mayonnaise, the mustard, the most powerful kings in history could not have eaten a sandwich like that. How do I get my kids to appreciate that? The owner of a steakhouse in New York City was on Fox and Friends the other day and was asked about finding good employees. And he said it's really hard to find wait staff because wait staff, they used to be servants, right? People who took great pride in their work. But today, they have a greater sense of entitlement. They're not used to working. They're starting later, and you meet someone who's 23 and they've never really had a job. It's hard to train them. Two things in particular stood out: 23 and never had a job, and how they used to be servants. So he said this on Fox and Friends that people are upset with him because he wants his employees to be slaves. No, he wants them to be servants and serve the customers. The word serve literally means to be devoted to and to provide for. In an era of entitlement, if your first job is being a server and your whole life you've been served, it's going to be really hard to make that transition and to make that change of perspective. There is zero controversy with what he said, but the fact that younger people especially are offended by that proves his point even more. There has been a lot of questioning why so many teenagers and young adults are anxious and depressed. There's a few big reasons, but here's one of them, I think. Kids have grown up their entire lives constantly consuming and producing very little. We are a consume culture. Kids especially, they go their entire lives constantly consuming, expecting to be entertained and served nonstop. Kids are doing very little producing or creating. If you want kids to feel fulfilled and want kids to feel like they have meaning, they need to create and produce. This is the story we shared the other day on the radio show about a homeless program in Denver, hiring homeless people to do menial jobs. And after a short period of time, 100 of these homeless people are now employed full time. And one of the homeless men said, this is such a great line. He said, when you take a good person down, broken, discouraged, and you give them an opportunity to be proud of themselves, to stand up and do something for themselves, that's one of the greatest gifts that anyone can give to anybody. So what is he talking about? Producing. There's a lot of rehab facilities in this country, places for troubled kids, way out in rural areas, way out on the farm, on the ranch. Why? Because you work. You need to work. Because when you're working, you're not consuming, you're too busy, you're producing, you're creating, you're building. I was talking to someone just yesterday from our greatest generation. And I asked him what's one of the major differences between today and then. And he said back then there was dignity in manual labor. And there was no stigma attached to being a good, hard worker, regardless of the kind of work that you were doing. Today, we have this talk of, immigrants do the jobs Americans won't do. Why wouldn't an American do it? That's a problem. It's because we've lost the concept of the dignity of work. Too entitled, waiting to be served, wanting to consume. How do I raise my kids to not be like that? This man I was talking to, he went on a long odyssey across Texas to Canada, and he said he learned respect for men who work with their hands. He learned to admire people in the middle of the country. This was back in the 40s, 50s. He learned to respect people in the country because they have a simplicity of character. I love that. I don't think you have to live in the country to experience this or to teach your kids these values, but you got to be intentional. I know I have to be intentional, but I don't know exactly what to do. I know my kids need to work, they need to produce, they need to create. And I'm going to be on the lookout for mindless consumption, because this just leads to unhappiness over time, really. It's not like I want them to take out the trash, so I don't have to take out the trash, although that's nice. But for their own sake, constant consumption leads to unhappiness over time. Arthur Brooks, who I admire very much, he wrote a book called The Conservative Heart. Excellent book. He says there's 4 essential aspects to true happiness and fulfillment: faith, family, community. Community is 2 friends who feel your pain when you suffer and joy when you thrive. 2 friends. And work. It's the 4th, work. And that's defined as, do you believe when you go to work every day that other people genuinely benefit from what you do? It's not defined by, is my job well compensated, but does it have meaning? Does it bring meaning to the world and to other people? Does it serve other people? That's what he means by meaningful work. That is meaningful work. It could be anything. Cleaning the street matters. And the problem is millennials are stuck in a state of constant consumption. Notre Dame sociologists, 18 to 23-year-olds, 65% said buying and shopping gave them, quote, a lot of pleasure. 65%, a lot of pleasure. Over half said well-being can be measured by what I own. Uh-oh, that's not true. Some professors think that this desire to shop comes from our ancient desire to hunt. Right? It's our modern version of hunting, even though it's not the same at all. We have tricked ourselves into thinking it is, right? The difference, among other, is a successful hunt gives you a complete sense of accomplishment. A successful shopping trip gives you a sugar high. And kids are taught and raised to think that this is the meaning of life, and this is what culture and society tells them constantly. That this, shopping, buying, consuming, will give you happiness and fulfillment. The opposite is true. Charles Murray says one of the keys to happiness and fulfillment is doing something that involves effort over a long period of time. That's one major reason why I think kids are so much more anxious and depressed than ever, even though kids have more material prosperity and comfort and abundance than ever before in human history, more abundance than ever. So what do? How do I find that line between giving my kids a life and giving them, this is a word you're not supposed to say, advantage, to be successful and to be their true self and to fulfill their potential, but not give them such a comfortable life that it actually handicaps them in the long run? What are some things you've done with your kids that teach them these principles we've just talked about? I find this to be of the utmost importance, and I really need your help.